Okay, so your task now is to go to the practice sheet titled Flashback, okay? And we talked before about how a writer uses flashback to explain a part of the story that happened before the actual story began, right? Okay, so look at the left-hand column here, right? These are different reasons that an author might use a flashback. So an author might use a flashback to explain something new about a character, maybe a writer uses flashback to explain something about the setting. Maybe a writer uses flashback to explain something about the conflict, or maybe even to explain something about a family, like a family situation, okay? So where you see these empty boxes, these purple boxes, you can type directly into these boxes. You can type your answers, okay? And you only have 3 of them to do here. So we're actually going to do the first one together, all right? And this is going to look very familiar because if you've already watched the video and done the practice sheet over foreshadowing, we're actually using the exact same stories here, but now we're thinking about them in terms of a flashback, okay? So they're going to look very familiar. You're just getting some new information. All right, so here's the first one. Let's read this together, okay? This one right here. I know old crazy Mrs. Dennis is the one to watch out for. Eric leaned in closer, and his voice dropped to a whisper. Last summer, I saw her outside in her front yard, and she gave me the most evil look I've ever seen in my whole life. It made me cold. And you know what? My mom's flowers all died, and they never grew back, and that was a year ago. Okay, so that's the little story example. Okay, why is this little flashback example important to the story? Well, in this little excerpt, Eric is explaining to his friends how he, quote, knows that Mrs. Dennis is evil, and he's trying to prove it by using his mom's dead flowers as proof. Now, it's hard to read an entire flashback in just a little example, and so I don't want you to be confused and think, wait a second, I thought you said earlier that a flashback is not just a memory, okay? And so here, because we don't have room or space or time to write an entire situation, this is the part of the story where the character's about to he's about to go into an example of, like, he's going to explain the whole situation here, okay? Like right where it says, you know what, my mom's flowers all died, they never grew back, that was a year ago, right? I know old crazy Mrs. Dennis is the one to watch out for. He leans in, his voice drops to a whisper. This is just the beginning of a situation where the character is about to explain a whole situation that happened a year ago, okay? So I don't want you to be confused and think, wait a second, all he's doing is sharing a memory. A memory is not a flashback, right? But I'm just showing you the part of the excerpt where he's beginning with the flashback. Okay, so why is this important to the story now? Well, one thought is that Eric is explaining to his friends how he knows Mrs. Dennis is evil, and he's trying to prove it by using his mom's dead flowers as proof. That's why it's important to the story. Now, did his mom's flowers die really because Mrs. Dennis gave him an evil look? Well, we don't know. We don't have the whole story here. But the point is that he's trying to show us, okay, the flashback is trying to show us something about Eric. The flashback is trying to show us that Eric has had an experience that he thinks proves that Mrs. Dennis is evil, okay? So let's actually go ahead and look at the second one together. This one right here, let's read this together. The author is using a flashback to show us something about the setting. Okay, here we go. What you have to understand about this house is that there was a fire here 100 years ago. Mr. and Mrs. Blackburn lived in the house at the time. Mrs. Blackburn walked into her garden one night with her kerosene lamp, since there was no electricity, and everything caught on fire. The house was practically destroyed, and Mrs. Blackburn was never seen again. We think her ghost still haunts the house and these grounds. Wow, okay, so what what might make this description important to the story now? Now, you don't have the whole story, so I'm not asking you to try to think of all the things that are happening in a story when all I gave you was this tiny little excerpt, okay? But you might think to yourself, oh, okay, so the setting is really important. What happened 100 years ago is really important, and maybe maybe the flashback is going to give us insight or understanding into what is going on inside the house. So I'm going to type that out, okay? You guys watch me. We can kind of go through this together. There's more than one way to explain this, so I'm just going to do it my way. You might have your way. So why this description is important to the story now is because, I hope my typing is not too loud, but that's okay. This description is important because it shows us, the reader, right? Us as the reader. The description is important because it shows us that there's a situation we need to know about so we understand more about the house in the story. We need to know about the history of the house. Okay? See how I did that? Now, that's all you're doing here, okay? Let's go ahead and talk about this one right here. And then guess what? You're only going to have 2 of these to do, right? Oops, I didn't mean to, I didn't want to copy and paste all that. I must have hit something by accident. Okay. Oh no, now that disappeared. Oh my goodness. Gotta love technology, right? Okay. So I was able to bring it back by doing some copying and pasting. I don't know why this happened. Okay, I'm just going to put a little placeholder there. Oh no, now that happened. Okay. Well, I'll go back and fix it later, but you get the point. Okay. Let's go ahead and look at this one. All right. So this wasn't the first time Jason had been in trouble for not doing his homework. He remembered last year at his old school how he couldn't remember to start his homework after school, and how it always seemed like his parents and teachers loved him when he did remember and hated him when he forgot. Couldn't they just love him for himself? Why couldn't they ever forgive him? All right, now again, I told you before that a memory is not the same as a flashback. Okay, but again, we only have a small section here to work with, so this is just an example. So why is this important to the story? Okay, this is a flashback that is telling us, the reader, we're learning about a conflict, right? Jason has a conflict. He thinks his parents and teachers love him when he does his work, and he feels like his parents and teachers hate him when he doesn't do his work. And his conflict is that why can't they just love him for himself? Now, is that true? Do we know that his parents and teachers really hate him when he forgets his work? Or do you think that's just an issue he's having with himself, like an internal conflict? Okay, so what you could type over here, it's important to the story because this flashback is showing us what is going on inside of Jason's mind. This flashback is showing us what Jason struggles with. Does anybody even know that he's struggling with this? Does anybody even know that he's having these thoughts? Has he told anybody? So maybe if Jason's acting a certain way in the story, it's like, okay, now we know why he's acting the way he's acting. It's because he's struggling with how his parents and teachers love him and how his parents and teachers hate him. They may not even hate him, okay? That's just his struggle. So that's the kind of thing you can think about when you write this part over here. Let's look at the last one. Sometimes flashbacks are used to explain something about a family or about other characters in the story. Here we go. Emerson's mom forgot her birthday last year when the new baby was born. Why would it be such a big deal for Emerson to forget this year? Last year, Emerson came home from school so excited about the surprise present she just knew would be waiting for her, only to find her mom and the new baby asleep in the messy house. There was no smell of cake, no birthday candles, no surprise. Emerson wanted to feel like part of the family again, but that baby took up all her mom's time. Her family would never be the same, it seemed. So this is a pretty big description. This is a flashback. We can see everything happening. We can see Emerson walking into the house last year. We can see the messy house. We can see the baby. We can see, the baby sister, baby brother sleeping with mom. There's no present, no cake, no candles, nothing. We can see it in our minds. We kind of feel sad for Emerson, right? And she feels like her family's never going to be the same. So what is the purpose of this flashback? Well, think about what we know now about the family, okay? We know now that the family is busy. We can infer that the family has a lot going on. We can infer that the house is messy because there's so much going on. And now we know why Emerson feels like her family's never going to be the same. Now we know how Emerson feels so differently about her family members. And we wouldn't have known that if we hadn't seen this flashback, if we hadn't read about this flashback. We wouldn't understand that about Emerson. So those are the kinds of things you can look at typing over here. Okay. All right. Let's look at one last section. This one has a lot of blanks, but here's what you do. Okay, remember that a writer uses flashback to explain a part of the story that happened before the actual story started. Now, here's where we're going to change things a little bit. It says use, a short story or a book that you've been reading to fill out the chart below with examples of flashback. If you would prefer to use movies or shows, then you could do that too. Okay, that's fine. Because the point is that we're thinking about the purpose of a flashback. So use a short story, use a book, or use a movie or like a TV show that you've seen. And you can do this too, okay? So where it says story or book, it's okay to think story, book, or movie. It's okay to use this on movies, okay? So explain something about a character. So what is a storybook or movie you've seen recently, okay, that uses a flashback to show us something new about the character? Just explain what happens in the movie or book here. And then over here, just explain like what it shows you about the character. Same thing here. What is a storybook or movie you've seen recently that explains something about the setting? Like, now we know why the house is haunted, or now we know why the mountain crumbled, okay? Or now we know why the movie theater burned down, whatever it is. You're just kind of summarizing what the flashback is in this box, and then the one way over here, you're just explaining what it shows about the setting, okay? Same for the conflict and same for the family. So this middle column right here, this is where you're just summarizing the flashback from the movie or from the book. You're just letting us know what it was. And then the last column over here on the right, this is where you get to explain what we now know about the character, what we now know about the location or the setting, what we now know about the conflict, and what we now know about the family because of that example in the middle column. All right,